Last week on June 7th, right before Oceans Day, there was a shark bite incident, actually 3 shark bite incidences in about 90 minutes of each other. 2 of them were in the same incident, and another one was separate 90 minutes later. And 2 people sustained major injuries, which is always a tragedy. But the onset of news items and the amount of shark sightings that are now being reported around the U.S. and other places with myths and sort of, I guess, hysteria around a lot of these shark stories where there's no hysteria needed, that's a problem. And so there's an article I found in the Destin log, which is near Destin. It's in Destin, Florida, that talks about it. It's a really weirdly worded article. They talk to an expert, Gavin Naylor from the Shark Attack Files, which that makes sense. But then they talk to a number of different captains, boat captains in the area that provide some interesting advice and some interesting reflection. So we're going to talk about the social media and communication that's happening around these events. We're also going to talk about what you can do to decrease your chance of getting bitten by a shark. But also we're going to just talk about sharks in general. So that's what we're going to talk about on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Luan. This is the podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking about a tragic event, or a couple of tragic events that happened on June 7th, just this past week, in and around Destin, Florida. Now, Destin, Florida is near the panhandle, if I remember correctly, of Florida. So it's just the northern part of Florida in the Gulf of Mexico. It's beautiful, beautiful beaches. Destin is probably one of the best beaches in Florida, for argument's sake. But, there's a lot of people from the south that go there to visit, people from the north, everybody visits. Like I said, it's a beautiful place. And there were a lot of people there on the weekend, on June 7th, in the ocean, in the water, having a good time, enjoying, the hot day, cooling off in the ocean, when suddenly a woman was bitten by a shark. It was a bad bite, and the woman, I believe, had to get a limb amputated. And what was weird, and I'm thinking coincidental, 90 minutes later, unfortunately, 2 teenagers were bitten. One had minor injuries, the other one had major injuries. My understanding is that the older one, the 15-year-old, had to be double amputated. Obviously, tragedies. My thoughts and prayers go to the victims and their families. And thank God they're alive, and thank God the people from the stories that I've read who acted without sort of thinking. They just went in the water, or if they were around the water, they went in to rescue the young girls and the woman, and they survived because of them. And my understanding, from what I hear, I haven't seen a story on it yet, but my understanding was that some of the people that were rescuing the girls were nurses and doctors. So that helped, obviously. And just a reminder, no matter what you do, where you go, it's always good to have first aid training, no matter CPR, first aid training. You never know when you might need it. I remember my mother telling me a story where she was a nurse, but she also had first aid and CPR, and she performed CPR on a person who had a heart attack just outside of a church. He ended up surviving. You just never know what you can do and who you can help. But having that training is really great. And if you have a workplace, it's always great to have them, hold a training. I used to have that at my work all the time. Every year we used to get, recertified. So anyway, that's just a side note. But obviously these are tragic events. And now is the crazy part. The crazy part is that there are a lot of people, there are a lot of news agencies, there are a lot of people online who are trying to cover this story, but they're trying to make it a bigger deal than what it is. The first story that I saw on TikTok was this woman who says she flies planes. She makes the statement that there are never sharks in that area, which I find that funny, because there are other reports that sharks have increased in abundance since they've been added. Most of these sharks have been added to the endangered species list, and there have been special protections on them. But needless to say, she is, acting, I assume, anecdotally, just from what her observations were. They never see sharks, and then all of a sudden this weekend she saw thousands of sharks. And there could be a number of reasons for that, which we're going to get into in a bit when we talk about Gavin Naylor's comments on it when he was asked by the Destin log. But, the second story, actually the second number of stories that I saw was, somebody, I don't know if it was like an AI voiceover or what have you. They were trying to make it look like a news report. And, some are doing a better job than others, but some start off like, it was like a scene from Jaws, trying to really play up the scary aspect. And obviously it's scary, it's gory, it's horrific to have to witness that. I haven't had that chance, thank God. But, it's a very, very intense and traumatic event to witness and obviously to go through. But to witness, it's very, very tragic. And so I get why people are kind of, making it sound worse, or make it sound really, really bad, because it was really, really bad. But this is where we start to see the demonization of sharks, right? Because what happens is you start to say, these sharks are coming in, some of the videos were saying one was acting aggressively. It was a great hammerhead that was probably chasing some sort of fish or stingray that was swimming along, that stay in the shallows. And this is what great hammerheads do. They're endangered species. There's never been a reported bite from a great hammerhead that I know of on a person. And so, saying it acted aggressively doesn't necessarily mean that it was acting aggressively towards humans. It was just probably hunting. It's what they do. The one obvious thing that we have to say is sharks are in the ocean. And the sharks have been increasing because of great policies, right, and great protections that they have. We need more sharks. We see hundreds of millions of sharks killed every year. Having more sharks is not the problem, right? That is not the problem, which we'll get into some of those solutions later on. But having more sharks is not the problem. It's actually better for the ocean, for the environment. That is a proven fact. We've seen it in science. Ask any shark expert. Having more sharks is better than not having any. So that's, so having more, there were thousands of sharks, and some of them could have been bull sharks, some of them could have been tiger sharks, some of them could have been all different types of sharks, right? And we'll talk about the reasons why that's happening. But we're starting to, all of these stories are happening. Then I started to see stories along the North Carolina coast that says they found a 500, there was a tagged 500-pound shark that was seen or pinged in and around the coastline of North Carolina, just not far off the coastline. Yes, understand why it's a concern, but this is why we have these tagged. The organization OSearch has been doing a great job in tagging over 400 great whites and other sharks to ensure that we find not only research from them, but we can detect where they are at pretty much any given time, and to be able to see where they last pinged and where they pinged the next time, and be able to detect their patterns. In fact, the research that OSearch has done over the last 2 decades or more has been able to see a pattern where great white sharks in the winter go down to Jacksonville, off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida, and in the summer they hang out right around Cape Cod. Both of them have seals and food and plenty of it, and that's where they go. And we've seen the population increase and the number of sightings increase. Now, people in the summer along Cape Cod have to be very careful. They have to know what the flag colors are. They have to know when there's sharks in the area, and so they don't swim. Also, you don't swim around animals that sharks eat. That's always a good idea. So there's a lot of things that, we can do, which we'll talk about in a second. But we're starting to see these, these reports of sharks being sighted. Yes, sharks are sighted all the time in the ocean, especially those that have satellite tags on. There's a reason why we've been tagging them. They're important to the environment. They're important to the ocean, which is they're important to us because it's important to the ocean. And so seeing all these stories, is not great. And of course, as you start to view these stories on TikTok and on Instagram, you start to get more and more videos that are around sharks. And, there's one account that I came across. That account talks about old shark bite stories, from the 80s, from the 90s, from the 70s, and he recounts them. They're very good stories that he tells it in a very good way, but it also perpetuates that there are more, to me, it perpetuates the idea that there are more shark attacks than we actually think, right? By hearing those stories more and more every time he posts something, it actually sounds like there are more and more shark attacks every year. That doesn't necessarily mean it's happening. If it is happening, yes, there are more sharks. More people are swimming in the ocean than ever. So there is a possibility that the shark attacks increase, but they're still very, 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 very small. You've probably heard me say, and you've probably heard others say, that you are more likely to get killed by a toaster than hurt by a shark, than bitten by a shark. The odds are very, very low that you are going to get bit by a shark, even if you're in the water. And let's be honest, folks, in many times when you're in the ocean, there's probably a shark around. You just haven't seen it. We see it all the time with drones and surfers. There are sharks in the area. They do not care that you're in the area. Now, there are ways that it can mistake you for bait. It can mistake you for prey, and that can be a problem. And we'll talk about some of those solutions in a little bit. But to continue with all these stories glorifying the, shark, quote unquote, shark attack, or that there could be shark attacks and people need to be scared. This is what media likes to do. It gets clicks, it gets views, right? It gets followers. People want to know about the nastiness of sharks. They want to know about the bitey end of sharks. So there are a lot of myths going around. There are a lot of misinformation going around. And there's a lot of just over-sensationalization of this story. Tragic as it is, I feel so bad for the people who were harmed. It is never good and is never, wanted on anybody. But unfortunately, it happens at times. The victims are not to blame. Okay, the lifeguards are not to blame. You hope that there's a better setup next time, and you hope that people learn from this, like the governments and the not the Coast Guards, but the lifeguards and things like that, to try and prevent more incidents like this from happening. But no, there's not much you can do, but there's a couple of things you can do. And what was interesting in this article on the Destin log, which I'll link to the show notes, is they start off the titles like, why did those sharks attack on June 7th? Here's what experts say. Experts with an S. And they go and they interview probably about 3 boat captains before anybody else was mentioned. Like before even you hear from Gavin Naylor from the Shark Attack Files and from, I think he's University of Florida. So it's like, why are we waiting so long to get to the actual expert? I guess they want to read down so that you can read more advertisements. I'm not sure. But I don't like the way they did that. I would just put in, like, I get you want, local ideas and local sort of accounts of what happened, but maybe put the expert first so that people can get an idea of what's been happening. Because a lot of times the language that is used by the boat captains, and I'm not saying that boat captains can't be experts in sharks. They see sharks a lot. They see whales. They see a lot of things that go on in the ocean. And a lot of times researchers will actually depend on that traditional ecological knowledge or local ecological knowledge especially in the areas of like the Gulf of Mexico, to find out what's been happening, what they've been observing, and so forth. But a lot of them sounds like they're complaining. I think they are boat captains, maybe for charters, for fishing charters and so forth. But, one said that the problem is the shark population in the Gulf of Mexico is large and more prolific than it ever has been, at least in his lifetime. He says there are more sharks now than there were 44 years ago because they banned any harvest of them, which you think it was good. And some of them they designated as endangered. But he goes on to say for the last decade that they talked to the National Marine Services about the government, about the abundance of sharks and how things are getting in the balance. He said there is a false perception that sharks are endangered. This is not a false perception. Yes, there are more and more sharks now because they're protected, but they are still endangered. That's where I worry about these local accounts. It's not always accurate. There are more people that swim in the water, which is true, than before, and there are more sharks in the water than ever before. That could be true. So the incident rate of shark bites is only going to go in one direction. That I don't agree with. We might see an increase, might see a small increase, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's just going to continue to rise and rise and rise. That depends on the mitigation measures that the people at the beaches take, like not only beachgoers, but also lifeguards and the people who protect the beachgoers, right? So I don't necessarily agree with that account, which, again, why would you say that kind of stuff? Or why would you have someone on saying that when it may not be true? That's where it gets a little iffy. There's one and then he goes on to say, sharks eat, that's what they do. They eat everything. They eat wave boards, beer cans, birds, and other sharks. That's true. They eat a lot. They'll test out a lot, but they kind of know what they want to eat. If that thing is hungry, he is going to try and eat whatever is close by. They just happen to be what was close by in terms of the people that were bitten. It was probably a mistake. I'm going to be honest. It was probably a mistake. They probably saw a limb, a leg, because it was in shallow water, and they thought, hey, this is something that I can have. The girls, 13 and 15, probably a little bit smaller than the woman. You know, the shark's probably thinking, hey, this could be a nice fish or something like that. Bit it, probably didn't like what it tastes like, and then, you know, what they taste like, and then went on. Now, Jarvis says he sees hundreds of sharks every single day. Potentially. He said they see up to 40 to 50 sharks every time they are bait fishing at the mouth of the pass, which is in like brackish water area. Sure, you could see that if you're chumming the water. If you're putting out bait fish and you see a lot of bait fish, maybe not chumming the water, but you see a lot of bait fish, you're probably going to see the things that eat the bait fish. Like, this is menhaden. So the sharks like menhaden, and that's what they're going to eat. So they're going to be there where they're going to eat. It's not necessarily that they're there to be aggressive around humans, is they're there because the bait fish are there, right? That's why they're really there. And then, so one person says that sharks get aggressive when they're mating. Okay. When sharks mate, they bite each other. That's true. We've seen that happen. They grab each other by the fin and hold while they are doing their thing. They bite each other up really bad, aggressive, brutal. I think that is something what's going on. So that's another captain says. Perhaps that's what's going on, is that it's a mating time. So that's where we're seeing thousands of sharks in the area. Maybe it could be mating. Maybe. We don't know. I'm sure some of the shark experts, the actual shark experts, the scientists that study those sharks, probably know that there's a season where all these sharks come together. We know in other parts of Florida, like Atlantic Florida, like Atlantic Ocean, on the Atlantic side of Florida, we've seen like thousands, tens of thousands of black-tipped reef sharks that will migrate along the shoreline. And, you know, you see that all the time. That's a well-known fact. So I wouldn't be surprised if you saw some kind of migration or mating season happen in Destin, Florida, or around that area. But I would imagine they would have seen it before. It usually tends to be a pattern or a trend that you see. So I don't know about that. We'll have to wait to see how this information comes about over the next week or so. He went on to say, when they catch a shark now, they show signs of bites, and the bites are fresh. He says, when we reel one in, there's another one right there with it, which is usually a sign that they are mating. So maybe that's what it is. I think the attacks. I think the attacks were confusion. May have thought it was another shark. They are extremely aggressive when they are mating, he said. So that's what he observes. Then they say sharks follow for bait. So there's another captain, Katie Anderson, who was out fishing, pompano fishing in South Walton, which is where this happened, early on January 7th. He says that there are a lot of bait fish close to the shores. So he says, I think they were further in because the bait was further in. Sharks just follow the bait. That makes sense, right? If the bait's coming closer, that's their prey. They're going to come in, and they're also going to come close. The sharks are everywhere, from 12 inches out of the water to 12,000 fathoms. There are no fences. Obviously, that's just where they go. This is the ocean. They can go anywhere they want to be. So it goes on with a couple of other captains that talk about it, and not all the information is right. And I find it interesting how it takes so long to get to Gavin Naylor, which, to be honest, have taken almost 18 minutes just to get to Gavin Naylor. But Gavin was interviewed for this. He's the director of the Florida Program for Shark Research, and that's at the Florida Museum of Natural History, located on the campus of University of Florida. It was right, University of Florida. So the first question that for Naylor concerned the recent sightings of the two orcas, known as killer whales, just off of Destin earlier in the week. It says, in the days after the June 7th attack, many on social media were wondering whether the orca's presence might have pushed sharks closer to shore. Now, this is probably thought of as a potential incident or something that's pushing those sharks close together, because two orcas in South Africa have been pretty much wreaking havoc with a lot of the sharks, or having their way with some of the great white sharks, the large great white sharks, to get their liver over the last, say, 10 years or so, or within the last 10 years. And it's driven the shark population down. Now, some people think it's the orcas, some people think it's a little bit more, and there are people who think it's a little bit of both. But that's probably where this idea is coming from. So, Gavin Naylor was asked, hey, could this have caused sharks to come closer, like these orcas, to shore? He said, no, not at all. He says, Naylor explained that the orcas would necessarily target smaller sharks, like a tiger or bull sharks, as those are found closer to shore, whereas orcas are commonly found in much deeper water in this area. He says, we don't know anything about the orca behavior in the Gulf of Mexico. There's no evidence that that they're just targeting sharks whatsoever. He says, so it's just a blind transitive explanation based on rumor and little evidence. It's a stretch, and there's no evidence to support it. So that's idea is out. So then Naylor was asked, if increased sea surface temperature in the Gulf of Mexico likely caused sharks to come in to shore. Naylor said the conditions were favorable for shark activity along with wind direction. He says sea surface temperatures with the right wind conditions can blow in some of the plankton close to shore. The plankton is fed on by menhaden, which is the bait fish, and menhaden is food for sharks. If the menhaden come in close, for whatever reason, the sharks will follow. And if there are people in the water, then you have a problem. That's what Naylor was saying. So he went over a single unverified eyewitness account on that date of the shark attacks. The freshwater estuary close to the location wasn't producing the amount of brackish water that has been seen in the days before the attacks. So Naylor explained that means that there wasn't water coming out as much. It may have been going in. That means there wasn't a lot of water flow. So there may not have been a lot of rainfall that allows that brackish water and fresh water mixed to go into the ocean. So, what Naylor explained is that the outflow from these estuaries pushes water offshore. Without that flow, a lens of salty water would have the opportunity to move closer to shore, creating an environment favorable for bait fish and sharks to be seen even closer to shore. So Naylor was then asked what residents and tourists can do to protect themselves. Here's where you can do the solutions. He says, it includes wearing polarized sunglasses so you can see into the water without worrying about glare, staying away from bait fish. So if you see, menhaden or any kind of smaller fish in the area, you may want to move away from it. Removing any reflective jewelry. Think about reflective jewelry as, anything that's shiny, that's gray. If it shines, so do the scales of fish. And so they might get confused and they might think that your jewelry is part of scales of fish. So, remove any jewelry before going in. Staying in groups. Avoid swimming at dusk or dawn. And if bitten, reverse, quote unquote, peacefully out of the water, facing the shark at all times. That last one's a little bit difficult. I'll be honest. If I was bitten by a shark, I don't know if I would do it. I don't know how I would react, to be honest. Peacefully does not seem like the first thing that comes to mind. You'd have to be very, not in shock. You'd have to have your wits about you, but it'd be very difficult if a shark's trying to take a chunk out of you or already has. So that can be a hard one to do, but the idea is to stay calm, don't splash. The more you splash, the more the shark thinks you have to fight, and the harder it'll be to get away. That's the expert. That's Gavin Naylor, Dr. Gavin Naylor. He is, like I said, part of the shark. He holds the shark attack files. He's part of the Florida program for shark research at the Florida Museum of Natural History, located on the campus of University of Florida. A great expert who's looked at shark attacks going back decades and continues to monitor those. We actually had him on the Beyond Jaws podcast. I'll see if I can link to the show notes. But that's it. That's sort of the explanation. I mean, we don't know for exactly why they're in, but there could be a number of reasons. I'm sure, more and more information will come out over the next few days and even within the next week. But what really matters is just sort of keep, the people that were victimized by these shark incidences, by these bites, keep them in your mind. If you pray, if you have a religion, keep them in your prayers. Nobody wants to see anybody get bitten. And it's just tragic. It really is. So let's have, let's not over sensationalize it. This was a coincidence, in my opinion. There's nothing to say that they are linked. There's no evidence at this point to say that they are linked, that they are the same shark. I believe from some of the stories I heard, and this could be rumor, that one of the sharks was actually pulled out of the water and eventually shot in the head. I don't know if that's true or not. That might be rumor. So take that with a grain of salt. But that's the information I have right now. I did try and get Gavin Naylor on for our Beyond Jaws podcast on a video to talk about this. We haven't heard back from him as of yet because I'm assuming he's insanely busy, on top of being insanely busy just because of this report and these incidences. So again, thoughts and prayers go out to the family or the families that were affected. I hope that they recover well. I hope that they have a decent life ahead of them. This was obviously a tragic thing. We never want to see this happening. But that's it for today's episode. I would love to hear what you think. Have you ever been around like a shark in the water or anything like that, whether you're scuba diving or just swimming in the ocean? How did you react? How would you react in the future? I'd love to hear from you. Just go to go to Instagram at How to Protect the Ocean. That's Instagram at How to Protect the Ocean. And if you want to be part of our newsletter, you can do so by going to speakupforblue.com/newsletter. And if you want to be part of the community where I'm going to put together an ocean app, like a community ocean app, we're going to be talking about how to protect the ocean each and every day. I can't wait to do that. We get a lot of cool features on this app. I was approached by a friend of mine or a colleague of mine that I've worked with in the past. He says, Andrew, you got to have a community app. I said, okay, let's do this. Most of it will be free. Some of it will be premium. But the idea is to really make a splash in mid-July to be able to talk about these things. So let's do that. Sign up. Go to speakupforblue.com/ocean app. All the links are in the show notes. I want to thank you so much for listening to this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Luan. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.